Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. After reminding myself back on Portland Bill when I took this picture, how IR or infrared can help transform a scene, I thought about it's high time to do an update on the camera that I bought, which had already been converted to infrared. And it's one of those cameras that I don't use all the time, and the look, I sometimes like it, I sometimes don't like it, probably the same for most people, but sometimes in the right kind of conditions it can really make an image look unique. So it's nice sometimes to take something that someone hasn't taken before, and yeah, it just gives a unique look to images, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. That's the beauty of infrared photography. It just allows you to be a bit more creative in your photography. So yeah, I took this image, or it was kind of an accident image back in Portland. It was awful weather that day when we went down to Portland, and we were hoping for a break in the weather, and we didn't really get it, and we ended up going home early. And as a result, with my infrared camera here set up on a tripod, this is not weather sealed one bit, so I was in a rush to take the shot and get it back in my bag as quick as possible, and in the rush I must have knocked the tripod, and hence why it's created this kind of double exposure, but it almost gives it a more ethereal look to the image. And I do find actually sometimes when I have those accidents that it actually does produce a really good image, and one that I probably couldn't replicate even if I tried. Now we're in summer, and when I thought about doing this video, we in the UK had quite a lot of weeks of just blue sky all the time, and that's the kind of conditions where infrared can really thrive, although it does do really well with clouds as well. So total blue skies, like this with normal photography, is not all that great for infrared. It's nice to have some interest in the sky, but as we're having all that weather, I thought I'd get the infrared camera out and put it in my camera bag and start shooting with it a little bit more now that the summer has arrived. And as you can see, today in the UK we're back to unsettled weather at the moment, so it's not completely ideal for infrared, but when you do get the breakthrough of sun, and that does allow for some more interesting photography, like now. So I'll put that one up now just so you can see, if you're unfamiliar with infrared, what an infrared shot of the scene behind me actually looks like. And that's the problem with this camera as well. Bright light conditions are great for infrared, but this camera doesn't have a viewfinder, so you're limited to using the LCD screen, which does make compositions occasionally a little bit difficult. And just as a recap, this one has been converted to 830 nanometers infrared. When you look at it on the screen raw, I'll put an image up now, it just comes out purple. You then have to convert it into black and white, and I've actually found that DxO's Photolab, and I've got an old version, Photolab 3, does an amazing job in infrared conversions compared to Lightroom. It just gives it so much more life in the images, and then I export that into a TIFF and then finish off my processing in Lightroom. So that's finished the bit of the recap on my camera. Obviously this is a Panasonic GX1, so it's an early Micro Four Thirds camera, and it's got a 16 meg sensor in it. And the reason I went for a Micro Four Thirds camera is obviously I can use all my lenses on the camera itself, although I have found that this combination, the 20mm f1.7 and the GX1, work really well, because some lenses do suffer from the hotspots you can get. They're just not designed for infrared photography, whereas the 20mm 1.7 I've never really had an issue shooting with. One thing I've done differently, as you might have noticed, is I have actually attached the lens hood to the lens, and that's because one of the downfalls of shooting infrared I found is that it doesn't seem to be that good at handling flare. Whether part of the conversion process removes something that allows cameras to shoot better in bright light, but I found that if you shoot in the sun Well, if you shoot in strong light without a lens hood on, then the shot will be ruined, because it'll have these really ugly flares running right through your frame. And touch wood, since I've put the lens hood on, that has cut down a lot of that problem for me. I thought I'd just go over some of the strengths of shooting infrared. Like, why would you shoot infrared in the first place? And as I said earlier, we're approaching summer, or supposedly in summer here in the UK now, and you can probably see it now. There's a lot more green in the landscape, and infrared just turns all of that white. So yes, it can be a little bit overbearing in images, and I try to avoid too much white because it does look a little bit bland sometimes, but just the right balance in an image and it's fine. What I do love about it in particular, certainly with tree structures, it really kind of enhances the structures in trees, to state the obvious. And one of the early shots I shot with this camera here, you can see the intricate details of that nothing special tree when I was just walking by it, but in infrared it just made it look like the hair of Medusa. It just turned a boring image into something that had a bit of intrigue to it. It also does well with architecture as well. It just tends to kind of emphasize structures and textures a little bit better, I find, than the normal photography. And I touched on it earlier as well, but if you've got an interest in sky, it's amazing what infrared will do to it, as long as you don't capture too many of those ugly flares in the image. So it does great skies, great architecture, great structures. Yeah, it just makes you be a bit more creative as well sometimes. Sometimes when you look at a scene, you think, oh, that looks all right. And then if you take it in infrared, it could completely change the entire scene. There's a couple things though I find that infrared's not that great for, and that might be because I haven't really done much experimentation in that area, and that's mainly low light really. This camera thrives on lots of light, and even now in this condition here, if I choose a low ISO, the lowest of this camera, which is 160, so let's shoot 1.7 wide open, it's still not maxing out the shutter speed of this camera, so it obviously needs a lot more light in order to be able to take a shot. And because of that, when the light starts to drop, you need to, unless you're on a tripod, whack up the ISO, and this camera doesn't, or this camera and the conversion doesn't seem to do that well with noise. Noise seems to creep in at quite low ISOs, but thankfully with Adobe's AI denoise functionality, it does seem to really help. And I'm not sure how well it would work with ND filters as well. So if I wanted to try and blur the skies, the great sky actually behind me at the moment, if I wanted to try and make it look like it's moving fast and to put some more motion in the shot, I'm not actually sure whether ND filters would do anything, and that's certainly something that I want to experiment with in the future, maybe a further video down the line. But anyway, I've rabbited on enough, and I want to do some more talking later on, looking at some comparisons. Like, I'll take this shot of infrared and I'll take it with a normal camera, and I'll compare the results to see whether you think that shooting infrared is worth it. So anyway, here is the montage of images that I've captured over the last few months, and then, like I said earlier, I'll talk about some of those images in a little bit more detail in the office back at home, and also compare the infrared and non-infrared shots as well, just as a bit of interest really, and a bit of fun. So here's the images. Right, so I hope you enjoyed those images. I absolutely love that last image that I just shown, the Horton Tower image. I just really rushed up the hill when I saw that big cloud moving over the frame, and I knew that I wanted to have that center in the picture. Yeah, so just to help demonstrate what scenes work well in infrared compared to non-infrared, I've picked some of those images as well as some others. And what I've done is when I've taken those images, I've taken them with a conventional unconverted infrared camera as well. And then I'll put them up side by side so you can compare what an infrared and a non-infrared image looks like. So let's get onto it. I like both compositions here, but you've got to admire how well infrared handles the sky. You know, whereas in the right-hand image, the sky is very hard to try and rein that back in. Whereas with the infrared, it turns blues to a darker grey, and then that really accentuates the clouds in the sky. And this image in particular doesn't have too much of the white, and I don't normally like shooting people in infrared because they come out a bit ghost-like, but I actually like the two groups of people and the child in pointing to something in the pond here. But yeah, I like both images, but you gotta admit the infrared does offer something a little bit different here. Right, let's look at the next composition. Yeah, so again, I picked this one because I quite like the subject. It's a little bit of dilapidated, but yeah, so you can just see that all the trees are white in the infrared version, but I just feel that the hut itself just jumps out of the composition a lot better in infrared than it does in the non-infrared version. And yeah, I really like the infrared version here. It's a lot better, I think, than the non-infrared version. So the comparison image this time was with the Sony A7S using the Pen F 38mm f1.8 lens, hence the vignette in the corners of that particular image. There's no such vignette on the GX1 infrared image because I probably just used the 20mm f1.7. So yeah, I like using that combination, the Sony with a 38mm and the GX with a 20mm, because they broadly equaled the same focal length. But again, I much prefer the infrared image here. Just the sky just really has a lot of impact in this image, as well as the actual building itself. And if we go on to the next comparison, it'll be looking at a close-up of the mausoleum. I had to crop, obviously, the images because the Sony is 3:2 ratio, whereas the GX1 is 4:3. But again, the infrared image just has so much more impact. It picks up a lot more tones in the doorway and on the sculptures or carvings above the doorway, as well as accentuating the architectural details of the building itself and then the great sky. And it just seems to cut through the shadows a lot more. So obviously you can see a lot more of that detail on the left compared to the right. And I would have obviously tried to bring that shadow detail out in the right-hand image, but it just came out, I guess, a lot easier when I was editing the infrared image. yeah, it's more of a tricky one, this, because I like the way on the non-infrared image that the house is almost picked out a little bit more in the landscape, and you can I think for me, even though I do like the infrared image, I do feel that this is an example where it's almost a little bit too much white in the scene. There's not much to help your eye move through the scene, whereas obviously on the right hand image the house is more distinguished against the tree line. And I like both compositions. Again here, again I feel potentially I could improve the edit a little bit, but I think to me, again, the infrared image tends to draw my eye a little bit more than the non-infrared version. I think the path being in a darker colour as opposed to the white gravel really helps to guide you into the image, and I feel like the fence is a lot more defined in the infrared version, and the tower just is a little bit more impactful in the image, although I do feel I probably could work on the sky a little bit more, because the sky on the non-infrared image I think is more impressive. And I like the way in both images that the trees help to frame the tower in the actual image itself. Right, so sticking with National Trust, this is part of Montague's house. It's like a folly in the landscaped gardens. So again, the white's accentuated from the green trees and the green glass, and I've tried to grass, and I've tried to tone down the grass a little bit because it can be a little bit overbearing. Whereas again, I think infrared here really does a good job on the left hand side, picking up all that excellent tree structure in the branch that again frames the folly in the distance. The image on the left, the infrared image, does look a little bit flatter compared to the one on the right, so that's something to be mindful of sometimes. I think looking at it, infrared image is almost a little bit flatter, whereas the non-infrared image, because you've got different tones and different shades of shadow on the trees and on the building, it does help to give it a more three-dimensional feel to the image. But I think there's no getting away. I just love the way that the infrared with trees in particular just helps to accentuate the leaves and the structure of those trees. So again, it's another location near to where I live, and again it's another win I feel for infrared here. It's just a lovely old building, and again just the white trees, the more impactful sky really do help lift the image on the left compared to the one on the right, which is the non-infrared version. So yeah, I much prefer the infrared version again in this comparison. Yeah, so there we go. Again, I hope you enjoyed this content, and I hope you're interested in seeing what infrared brings to the table. And I'm still really pleased with the infrared camera, especially now that I've got that optical viewfinder on the top, just to help me compose scenes with a 20mm f1.7 lens that I've got for it, which I predominantly use for it, just because it's a nice compact setup which I can just throw in any of my camera bags when the conditions are going to be favourable for shooting in infrared. So as always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.